The tank within this video has recently got buffed, and we are talking about the tier 10 premium M48A2 120mm tier 10 American medium tank. And this is one of the vehicles in the game that was given out for free as part of an operation, and most people thought, you know what, this is kind of bang average. And when you compare it to something like the M60, at least before it was buffed, it was kind of like, well, why would I want to play this version since it doesn't really gain a whole lot? But since the buffs that this tank has received, this vehicle is actually one of the more interesting ones, at least in my personal opinion, to actually play at tier 10. And we're going to see one replay that kind of showcases the pure power and the ability of this tank against a lot of the opponents you might be looking at within the game. And then one of the other replays at the end of the video is just going to showcase a bit more of a kind of aggressive playstyle that you can take with this tank, because ultimately we are playing Prokhorovka in this video, or at least in this replay, which is probably not the nicest map for being able to get a load of damage. But one thing that you'll notice, every single time I fire within this vehicle, I'm always checking to see if you can hit the tracks, and this is something you should do in all vehicles on World of Tanks if possible. So it's stuff I keep banging on about within the videos, but if you can deal damage and get tracked damage, or tracked assistance damage, or you can hit the tracks and deal damage, then you should every single time go for it, unless you're in a very limited kind of situation. Maybe you want to allow them to actually move forward and get away because you don't want to track them and then they come after you. Maybe that's a reason, but ultimately 90% of the time you want to be aiming at people as tracks to be able to get the potential for assistance damage at the same time, crucial for marks of excellence, and will just help your team win games. Now, Prokhorovka is a good map, but it's not particularly good if you have no light tanks on your team. And the core problem I have with this vehicle is that I'm playing the mid-range like you'd expect from a medium tank to get some view range to spot people, is that if I play the mid-range in this vehicle, you don't get any turret armor, to be honest with you, and most people will pen your actual turret in this thing. So that doesn't even account for that giant cupola that this vehicle has, which is of course a big weak point. So you can bounce a few rounds, it's very unlikely, and a lot of the time if you're on Prokhorovka you're coming up against tank destroyers that usually have very good penetration, which means they'll probably go through your turret anyway. So these are things that you have to account for when playing in your vehicles on in the M48A2. Now I'm hoping this vehicle will become released for free once again, like we had in a previous kind of update last year, I believe it is, so 2021. We actually had this vehicle released for free. Now this vehicle is, to all intents and purposes, a pretty good one, and you can use it really, really well. And you can see here me going after the Emil, and not only using the assistance damage like we talked about for the tracks, but also going for assistance damage from spotting if possible, because this vehicle has really, really good view range. It doesn't have the best concealment because it's gigantic, and talking about being gigantic, it opens yourself up to a lot more shells. Much like we talked about with the armor on the turret, the hull armor is a similar sort of story. You get penned pretty much by everything. Effectively, you're like an M48 pattern hull, which you can expect to bounce maybe a couple of rounds from lower tier tanks, and maybe you'd bounce a few rounds, but ultimately it's not particularly amazing. Now you're seeing me try and hit the Object 268 version 5 on the enemy team. We miss a shot which I thought might be able to pen, but it doesn't. Maybe we'll get some opportunities in a minute to be able to do that. We go for the Leopard, it misses. We then go for the Object 268 version 5, which misses again. So these are all things that are super annoying when you're playing in the game. Now, in terms of equipment setup, maybe we could make the tank more accurate using vertical stabilizers, which I'd highly recommend on most vehicles, but the accuracy of this tank was made significantly better with the buffs, which allows you to play it without stabilizers potentially, although maybe this video is suggesting you should be using stabilizers. But the setup that we were using was coated optics, advanced loader, and also we were using advanced optics to get the better view range. So all three allow you to have a pretty unique build, or not unique, but a pretty overall build that allows you to do loads of things that you might need to do. You can see here farming up the damage really nicely. You've got a 5.7 second reload to be able to deal 400 damage every single time, and of course it being very, very consistent, as with all of the American tanks in the game, to be honest. The accuracy of them is fairly consistent across the board, being relatively good generally, except for maybe a couple. But I digress. We've picked up nearly 5,000 combined damage within this game. Actually, we've surpassed that at this point, which is really, really good. I'm stoked that we've done that, but it is of course a losing game, and maybe that's down to me playing a little bit passive within this section of the game. We could still claw it back because there's a lot of tier 8s on the enemy team, but unfortunately we get spotted. And one thing that you'll notice in the bottom of this vehicle is that it is limited by the amount of ammo that it gets, because of course having limited amounts of ammo is always so much fun. Now we're down to 5 rounds, which means maximum amount of damage we can do with fully penetrating shells on average is 2,000 damage. Now I can guarantee the enemy team have more than 2,000 damage or hit points, since the E5 on the enemy team has more than that in just the tank itself. Now I try and get a lucky shot into the Emil there. Obviously it doesn't go my way, which is a little bit unfortunate. A Borsig shell, I believe, comes in there, almost hitting me, and now it's just a case of trying to grind away the T125's hit points, who's done a really good job on the enemy team's flank, but of course driving through the open field is not particularly the best idea, especially when you've got a load of campers like me in the base. Now, this is really, really not a good situation. There are me and a tank destroyer left on our team, and of course when you're in this sort of scenario you've got to be thinking about the enemy artillery, which of course we do, and that's something you kind of have to account for. I try and get a shell using the HE rounds on the Dragon potentially, because maybe I could pen that if I hit the side, but I decide it's probably not the best idea to be sat up here. And of course then the artillery, being as good as it always is, comes in and takes 1,000 hit points. I'm surprised it didn't just take me out of the game considering the armour of the vehicle, but it doesn't matter a whole lot. We managed to take away a decent result anyway, but we are using now the HE rounds on the Borsig. Of course we can pen the HE with the Borsig, and I'm just trying to maximise how much damage I've done within this game so far. Of course the enemy tanks are pushing quite rapidly towards us, so I try and hit a shot on the move, which goes absolutely nowhere, and then the Emil that's been on 162 hit points and that we farmed throughout this entire game finishes us off in the side, but we still picked up 6,200 damage with 1,100 assistance in a losing game. And you can do this too if you do decide to pick up this vehicle, or if you've actually got it in your garage. It's actually worth taking out for a spin now, and I'm sure many of you, if you've watched this video for this channel for any length of time, you already know about the M48 and you may already have it, so it'd be interesting to see your opinions in the comment section down below. The next replay that we have is on Muravanka, and this is another one of the maps that is quite good for the M48A2 pattern, and I've actually played a minimal 3 games within this thing since the buff, which might seem very low, but I played quite a bit of this when it was first introduced, and you can definitely see the benefits of having the reduced reload, because I don't know whether we went over the full buffs, but essentially what you got is a reduced reload, a better accuracy, so you're more accurate, and essentially that allows the tank to be a hell of a lot more effective in its use over something like maybe the M60. One thing that I will definitely be putting on this vehicle though, I think at this point, is just using vertical stabilizer to basically make it a laser, because of all of these missed shells that just don't seem to be going anywhere near where you're aiming, so vertical stabilizer is probably a must in my opinion. But the accuracy, you know, you can still make it work regardless, but the key thing that I think that this tank now has after all of the buffs is that you can be so versatile, because it had everything anyway, it just wasn't excellent at anything in particular, but with the reload buffs allowing you to have about 4,000 damage per minute means that yes, this thing is very, very good. Of course, reloading in 5.7 seconds, that's 10 rounds, or just over 10 rounds a minute, which when you've got 400 alpha, of course, doesn't take a genius to work out 4,000 DPM. So really good fun to actually use. Highly recommend using enhanced combat rations if you do decide to use them. And it's one of those things where you can just sit in front of the opponents and just chomp away at their hit points, and before a short period of time, they're basically removed all of their hit points from them, and they're into your bank of damage caused within the game. So it's one of those things where a lot of people, they kind of are like, oh, it's only 400 damage, but then they get hit 5.7 seconds later and take another 400, and then another 400, and then another 400, and before they know it, they've actually lost a ton of damage to a tank that isn't even an autoloader. You see some autoloading vehicles in the game with 400 alpha having a reload or an intraclip reload of like 3 seconds, so the fact that this has a reload of 5.7 seconds means that, yeah, you can be pretty monstrous with how much damage you're dealing. Of course, it pales into comparison with something like the SU-122-54, the tier 9 tank destroyer, the Tortoise, stuff like that, but they are non-turreted, pretty inflexible tank destroyers, whereas this one is definitely a very flexible tank. Mobility wise, this tank is actually okay as well. You can get forward, you can do what you need to when it comes to progressing the flank if needs be. Of course, we talked about the armor not being amazing, but in this replay you're seeing more of an aggressive playstyle. You can get up close and personal with even some of the tier 10 heavies in the game, things like the Super Conqueror. If you know that they're fired, or maybe they're not kind of looking your way, then you can be really cheeky and be a proper support tank in the game. You notice that there was a Jaegeru over by the house, so we tried to fire and blind fire him. Potentially he's coming out to try and get a free shell of damage on us. Of course that wouldn't have happened, but yeah, we managed to avoid it anyway. So pretty lame game, to be honest. 1700 damage. You know, it's not even a fire for effect at this point. Of course, fire for effect being you've dealt the same amount of damage as the hit points of your vehicle. That's usually a pretty good start for a game. If you haven't done the hit points of damage as you have actually got hit points on your vehicle, then maybe it's not the best game that you've ever had. But of course, when you start getting over that, it becomes really nice. Now, we finished down off the M48 on the enemy team. We then track the T95 on their team, which is really nice. We're going for the retrack, but we go for the cupola instead and hit that nicely. Now, I'm very scared of the Waffle E100 that's on the enemy team, who may or may not be able to get a shot on us. I was hoping that our team would actually win the eastern side of the map to then progress through, spot the Waffle. I would have been able to deal damage, but it looks like we're just basically falling apart at this point, and there's not a lot left in this game for our team to be able to do. Obviously, I try and poke over this side to just see if we can spot any of the tank destroyers or the mediums that might be over here, which of course we do, but the Jaeger is not in a position where we can hit the cupola since he's down the slope and we're kind of not allowing us to get the hit. Then, for some unbeknownst reason to me, the T77 on the enemy team decides he's going to YOLO. Not entirely sure if I was getting hit by the Waffle with HE, but obviously it wasn't with his main gun because he barely did any damage whatsoever. Maybe it was the light tank in the field or something, but either way, what we're trying to do here, knowing that the T77 is fully reloading, we're just trying to put him in between us and any potential candidates for coming towards us. Now, I try and go through the tracks and actual damage to the T77 doesn't actually happen, but it doesn't really matter with that last shell there. The Jaegeru and the T95 are now pushing up. With the Jaegeru coming over the hill, there's not a lot we can really do. What I try and do is bait the Jaegeru by stopping and pulling back, which means that he's like kind of overcommitted, but unfortunately we get shut down by the T95 E6 on the enemy team, of course the other tier 10 medium within the game. But a fairly okay result, 4,855 damage, but of course we lost both of the replays within this video. Hopefully gave you a good indication as to how this tank performs and the sort of things that it's good at. It's not good at kind of performing on ridge lines for the most part. It's kind of a poke over the ridge line, deal your damage and then leave again. You don't want to be sitting up there, the turret armor just won't hold up, but equally you can be quite aggressive and be a very aggressive support vehicle, and that's kind of where this tank falls in the category. Other than that, it is a brilliant tank and I really did enjoy it, and it's definitely worth playing after the buffs that it's received. I hope you did enjoy this video. If you want to send in any of your replays, if you've had a fantastic one And then please send me an email in the email link that will be in the description of all of my videos now, where you can send in your own replays. Ideally, what if you do is you just make a private YouTube video and then just link me the video itself, and then we'll do it that way, and then I can review your gameplays as well. So hopefully you guys do that if you are interested. Otherwise, you can just send me the video itself on the email link as well. But other than that, I hope you do have a brilliant rest of your day, and I hope you join me in the next video coming soon. Goodbye.